heard some of the history and context within which all of our Baha'i communities here are striving to function, create a pattern of community life, create a certain, as Chief White described, a certain pattern of dialogue and engagement. And it poses a real challenge. Knowing this history, having this legacy, it is part of the legacy of the community, in effect, that you're trying to create here. You're trying to create a new pattern of community life here for the people who live here. How do you create that community life, connecting to the passage Deloria read, where, I can't remember the exact words, but all incidents and tools and elements of oppression and prejudice are in effect obliterated. That's the challenge. That's the legacy, right? That's what was described as the legacy of the challenge that the House of Justice has put before you. I'm from Victoria, we don't have these issues down there. But that's the challenge. So we can sit and talk about the plan and the core activities or whatever, but what they are supposed to do is create a pattern of community life that transforms so that that baby doesn't tell the story that he told about his experience. So how is what you're going to accomplish that? That was the first thought and connection. Second, just two anecdotes before we break about, well, one is the story of course, the champion in the cause of building the relationships with indigenous peoples was, of course, Amatul Baha, who traveled to every corner of the indigenous world in this country. She dedicated years of her life. It was her passion to do that. And she writes that everywhere she went, she opened with the same thing. She apologized for what her descendants had done to these cultures and peoples and their descendants. And she praised the history and culture and traditions and knowledge of these people. And that is how she always began. And she describes that. There's a 30-page letter that she writes about her history with indigenous peoples in this country, and she describes that. The second thing that crossed my mind, because when Chief White was talking, is from an American context, but it was Abdu'l Baha's example. When Abdu'l Baha was in Washington, D.C. in 1912, he was invited to dinner. You've probably read this story, but he was invited to dinner. Of course, they were hosting a big dinner for him. The wealthiest, one of the great benefactors, a wealthy European white woman was having him for dinner. And this is 1912. In 1912 in Washington, D.C., there was one restaurant where white and black people could eat together. One. There was only one. And Abdu'l Baha, of course, brought Louis Gregory with him to this dinner, which was only the rich white, there were a few Iranians, but rich white folks of upper society in Washington. And then what did he do? He broke every taboo, every social rule, challenged every unconscious prejudice that was in the minds of all of those people sitting there by seating Louis Gregory in the seat that was reserved for him, the seat of honor. The one black man that was in that gathering, right? It was a simple act where he challenged every ounce of prejudicial thought and rather exemplified that universal love, which everyone in that room had been incapable of experiencing in the context and milieu that they were in. This is the changing of the heart. This is the transformative. But it's also a social act where he was breaking the social norms and social meanings that people carried around with them. Didn't do it in a violent way. He didn't do it quite, it was a non-violent way, but he was doing something very directed and conscious to change these people's ways of thinking so they can't go back to the old pattern.